The case has taken over 30 years to reach a conclusion.
We knew he was the one. He was guilty. Mum was right. He did kill again. Sarah was the baby sister. She was the youngest. She was bright and bubbly and always smiling and always looking for fun and mischief. Sarah was lovely, very lively, always laughing, always singing. She always wanted to have fun, party. She had a whole future ahead.
In 1991, 33-year-old medical secretary Sarah Crump had just bought her first flat in Southall in West London.
She had a nice boyfriend, she was settling down, she really had done well. But I think with the mortgage, etc., and she was only working part-time, so I think she found it quite difficult financially.
And there was another reason Sarah needed money.
She was desperate to have a baby, and she would have been a fantastic mother. She was having problems conceiving, so she went down the IVF route. And I do believe that that's why she decided she had to work extra, so joined an escort agency.
On 28th of August, Sarah took a booking for a client to come to her home address. The person who booked Sarah gave the name as Duncan. We know that he turned up in the early hours of 29th. Sarah didn't turn up for work the next day. She failed to make contact with her boyfriend. Sarah was found in her bedroom, and she had clearly been murdered. She'd suffered a number of stab wounds, and this had clearly been a brutal and terrifying attack on her.
When we realised it was Sarah, very sad, very traumatic. It was just unbelievable, terrible time, terrible.
A murder investigation was launched. The man who called himself Duncan was the prime suspect. But after searching phone records, detectives discovered Sarah's visitor that night was a delivery driver called David Smith.
David Smith was a physically imposing character. He was over 6'3" tall and aggressive to everyone, particularly women.
He was arrested and questioned.
He denied any involvement. He denied ever being in Southall. He denied that he used sex workers.
But investigators found evidence that placed David Smith near the crime scene at the time of Sarah's murder.
A cash withdrawal receipt for £100, which Smith had withdrawn from a cash point very close to the flat.
When officers confronted David Smith with the evidence, he changed his story.
He had to actually make some admissions that yes, he had been with her that night. He was a client. He did use sex workers, but he still maintained that he left her alive and well.
Meanwhile, the forensic evidence was inconclusive.
There was no trace of Smith in the flat. His fingerprints weren't found. There was no DNA. He must have tried to obliterate any trace of himself having been there that evening.
Nonetheless, in 1993, with the police still hopeful they could secure a conviction, David Smith went on trial for Sarah's murder. But they couldn't prove that Smith was the only person who had seen Sarah that night.
One of the issues in the trial that Smith relied upon and his defence team were that there were unidentified fingerprints in the bedroom.
After 3 hours, the jury returned a not guilty verdict.
He was guilty. We all knew that. The police knew that. It's just the jury believed him. We saw him walk away, a free man.
We just couldn't believe it. It was such a shock to all of us. And I remember Mum outside the Old Bailey on the steps saying, "This person will kill again."
At the time, there was a law in place which was referred to as double jeopardy, which meant that someone who had been tried and found not guilty of a serious crime by a jury could not be retried ever again. And David Smith was allowed to walk the streets as a free man.
8 years later, another woman, Amanda Walker, was murdered in London in very similar circumstances.
Amanda was 21 years old, and she too was engaged in the sex industry as an escort. Her handbag and clothing was found the next day. It was very distinctive, and it was bloodstained. One of the people who lived very close to where the clothing was found was David Smith.
By now, 43 years old, Smith denied meeting Amanda, just as he did in Sarah's case. But this time, forensics proved otherwise.
David Smith's blood was on Amanda Walker's clothing, and also his fingerprints were on the bag.
Detectives realised that Amanda Walker had suffered almost identical, distinctive wounds to Sarah Crump. And whilst awaiting trial, Smith made a staggering confession to a fellow inmate.
He said that not only had he murdered Amanda Walker, but he'd also murdered another female several years earlier and managed to walk away and get away with it.
Despite the confession, the double jeopardy law meant Smith still couldn't be retried for Sarah's murder. In 1999, a jury found Smith guilty of Amanda Walker's murder, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 17 years.
Mum was right. He did kill again. Amanda lost her life to this man who should have been found guilty of Sarah's murder all those years ago.
But in 2005, the double jeopardy law changed, allowing people to be retried if there was new and compelling evidence. 3 years later, police were given permission to reinvestigate Sarah's murder.
It was a very, very, very good feeling. Very good.
Aware this was their last hope of a conviction, detectives spent 12 years building a watertight case. This time, they had to ensure the jury was left in no doubt.
In the initial trial, his legal team relied upon the fact that there were fingerprints within the bedroom that hadn't been eliminated. And that was one of the stumbling blocks that we felt might have caused the jury to doubt whether David Smith was responsible.
Old witnesses were traced and re-interviewed, and investigators tracked down people who had access to Sarah's flat before she moved in, painstakingly comparing and identifying each separate print.
We were able to eliminate the most significant fingerprints, and that was a massive success for us to show that these prints had been left by people who had access legitimately and not by the murderer.
The law change also now meant that Smith's criminal past of violence against women could be revealed in court.
We were able to introduce David Smith's bad character, things that he'd done in his past. For example, in 1976, he was convicted of attacking a woman and raping her in her house in front of her children at knife point. In 1987, he was convicted of falsely imprisoning a woman in the cab that he was driving. So these two offences were also important in showing who David Smith was, what he was capable of.
Coupled with being found guilty of Amanda Walker's murder and his 1999 confession, the Court of Appeal decided Smith could be retried for Sarah's murder. In May 2023, 30 years after the original trial, David Smith was convicted of Sarah Crump's murder. He was given a whole life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years.
Fortunately, Joe and I were sat very close together and we could comfort each other, and we were just, it was very, very moving. We were shaking, we just couldn't believe it. We've done it. If the law hadn't been changed, then we would never have had justice for Sarah.
The whole case was a testament to teamwork and belief and never giving up. It was really, really important to us to bring some sort of closure and justice to the family.
This guilty verdict has just laid it all to rest. Sarah can rest in peace now.